This is Darwin's Jesus. Welcome back to the channel. Recently, I posted on my X account that science assumes that God exists, and almost all atheists had no idea what I meant. So, to clarify, I decided to host a Twitter space with an atheist named OnlyLad, who was really well behaved and open to discussion. In this conversation that I had with OnlyLad, I explained why I believe that science presupposes the existence of God, and he was able to push back and share his thoughts. I think the discussion was really productive, and it gave me the opportunity to lay out my case in a clear and structured way. So, if you'd like to understand why science assumes that God exists, I hope you'll take the time to check this out. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now, let's get into it. All right. What is going on, everyone? Thank you so much for being here. OnlyLad, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And this is your first space ever, right?
Yeah, I'm glad we managed to get it working.
Yeah. Hopefully, we don't have any glitches. We actually tried to run this like a test space about an hour and a half ago, and it was really glitchy. So hopefully, we got through all of that, and now it's just gonna work really well, and we're not gonna have any problems. But we'll see. We'll see. Every space I've had, I think there have been some glitches where people had to drop out and come back. So anyway, we'll see. We'll deal with it as it comes. But yeah, thanks so much for being here. Let's see. Would you like to introduce yourself to everybody before we get into everything?
Of course. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lad. I'm just kind of some dude on the internet. I um, as when it comes to atheism, I'm kind of just 80% sure God doesn't exist. Like I'm confident enough to argue about it, but still open up to having my mind changed.
Okay. And would you say that you're passionate about this?
Kind of. I'm a very argumentative person. I come from a very argumentative family, and the main reason why I interact with religion at all is because my brother, who used to be a militant atheist, is now in seminary, and we kind of have these discussions from time to time. Uh, but yeah.
Your brother's in seminary now, and he was a militant atheist.
Oh yeah, he's the one who got me out of church and I guess questioning my faith, and now he's a born again Christian.
Wow. When did that happen?
Um, he's changed his minor religion I think about 8 years ago. And I think this is his first year in seminary. He's currently on a retreat. Said he'd pray for me.
So that's really funny because, well, it's funny to me because I kind of am responsible for my brother and sister dropping out of church and becoming secular. And now I'm the Christian, and I'm also the oldest. I take it that your brother's older than you. So, I mean, that's right,
Funnily
isn't it?
enough, no.
Really? He's not? He's younger? Twins?
No, I am the oldest of the family.
So you let your younger brother talk you into atheism, and now he's a Christian.
Less talk me into atheism, more like he started asking me questions. I didn't really have the answers for them, and then I started examining the religion itself and going, "Yeah, actually, this just doesn't make sense." So now I'm an atheist.
All right, well, that's really interesting. It kind of reminds me of the Brothers Karamazov. Have you read that?
I have not, but I'm sure it's an amazing book.
It is a very, very good book. I would highly recommend it. But in that book, there's an older brother, and he's a rabid atheist, and his younger brother is a very passionate Christian. And the atheist is always taking his younger brother to task on Christianity and God and these sorts of things, especially on the problem of evil. It's a really, really good book. One of my favorites. Definitely top five. But
Wait, I
anyway,
remember hearing about that. Sorry, my bad.
yeah, go ahead.
I remember hearing about that. That's the one where they have the where what was the one of the stories? The The story with the Pope. If Jesus came down to Earth today,
The
the Pope.
Grand Inquisitor is what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic story. I was actually thinking about doing a thread on it because I love that story so much. It's a story within the book, and that's a story that the older brother, the atheist, tells to his younger brother. I think his name is Alyosha. It's been a while since I read the book, but yeah, it's probably my favorite part of the whole book is that story. But the book is great all the way through. Yeah. Anyway, I guess I'll go ahead and reset the space real quick, or let everybody know what's going on. So for those of you that are just coming in, I'm here with my atheist friend who goes by Lad, and we're going to be discussing the topic of whether or not science assumes that God exists. I think that this is going to be a good discussion. So if you guys are interested in this topic and you like what you've heard so far, we've just went through introductions so far, but if you want to help other people to hear this, please share this space, retweet it so other people see it, and hopefully will come in here. And let's see, having said that, I think I will go through the intent of the space. So the intent of this space is for myself and Lad and everybody else that joins later on to have a productive conversation about the topic. So we want to broach the topic. I haven't really made a formal argument for this with anyone in a discussion before. So looking forward to doing that. And this is not meant to be something like blood sports. It's not meant to be knock down, drag out, or anything like that. I'm going to be listening intently to what Lad says and trying to make sure that I understand him. And I hope that he will reciprocate that and try to understand me. I'm going to be trying to make sure that if I interrupt him, I do it politely and only if I really feel like I need to. And by the way, if I do that, Lad, and you really want to finish your thought, just tell me and I'll let you finish your thought. But I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum. Uh, let's see. So that's the intent of the space. Now, the plan for the space is that we're going to discuss this for roughly an hour, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, probably not exactly an hour, but roughly. And then we are going to open up the space to everyone else that wants to come up and discuss this with us. So if you are listening and you have any comments or questions, or you would like to add to the conversation in a productive way, then once we open it up to everyone, just request a mic and then raise your hand. And I will call on you, assuming that you are not too far back in the stack and I'm able to get to everybody. And the reason why I say that is because I do have a hard cutoff time, which is 10 o'clock. I'm Central Standard Time, so that gives us about an hour and 45 minutes from now. I promised my wife I'd be done at 10. So we have about an hour and 45 minutes. So does all that sound good to you, Lad? Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we get into everything?
Nope. Sounds great to me.
Okay, awesome. Well, then let's go ahead and get into the discussion. So as far as the discussion, I'm curious, what do you think my argument is?
Uh, I was actually going to ask you the first thing. That first thing.
Okay, go
If
ahead.
I had to presuppose your argument, though, I would assume it goes something along the lines of, uh, science presupposes God because everything presupposes God.
Okay.
But I feel like, no, never mind. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. So why do you think, like, just based on what I've said so far, why do you think that I'm wrong?
Oh, you haven't really said anything yet. Are you asking me why the straw man I came up with is wrong?
No, no. Okay, that's fine. No worries. I'm gonna go through it, and we'll if you need me to define anything or you need me to clarify anything, just go ahead and let me know. Okay. This is a two-way conversation, so like you're my co-host. And speaking of that, just so everybody knows, this is my co-host. So if you guys come up and interact with us, I expect you to show him more respect than you show me, okay? Because he's
trusting me in this space to be a gentleman, and I'm not going to take advantage of that. All right, so let's go through the argument. I did post it. I guess you didn't see it, but that's all right. So I'm going to go through this slowly. This has 4 premises and a conclusion. Okay, and you can actually see this. Speaking of that, I'm going to go ahead and attach it to the top. Let me see if I can delete what's in the nest right now. Give me just a second here. All right, so I'm going to put this in the nest. Do you know what the nest is? You probably don't, right?
I think I see it.
It's at the it's at the top. I'm going to put it in the nest so that everybody can see it. All right, so there we go. All right, now if you look above us, you should see it in here. Do you see that argument right there?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
One in order.
Right. So in order to do science, this is the first premise. In order to do science, certain preconditions, such as the uniformity of nature and the reliability of reason, must be assumed. So I don't want to, I mean, if whatever you like, there's 2 ways I can do this. I can do this one premise at a time and we can talk about each premise, or I can read through the whole thing and then we can talk about each premise. I think I'll read through the whole thing actually, and then we can talk about each premise, okay? So premise 1, in order to do science, certain preconditions, such as the uniformity of nature and the reliability of reason, must be assumed. If these preconditions lack a plausible explanation under atheism, but are well explained under theism, then assuming them implicitly assumes the truth of theism. Premise 3 says these preconditions must be assumed in order to do science. Premise 4 says these preconditions lack a plausible explanation under atheism, but are well explained under theism. And then the conclusion is that therefore doing science implicitly assumes the truth of theism. Okay. Now that probably scrambled your brains a little bit, unless you're really sharp and you're used to these sort of conversations. So I want to go through each one of these and try to explain it so that everybody is able to understand it, especially yourself. All right. So the first premise, in order to do science, certain preconditions, such as the uniformity of nature and the reliability of reason, must be assumed. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah, hard agree, by the way, to the first and the third condition.
Okay.
There in fact, under in philosophy we call these the 3 basic assumptions. The assumption that we exist, that the universe exists, and that we can learn something about the universe. Yeah, so 1 and 3 completely agree.
Okay, so do you know what other assumptions, when we're talking about number 1, can you think of other assumptions that need to be assumed in order for us to do science besides the uniformity of nature and the reliability of reason?
The uniformity of nature and the reliability of reason. Mm, I mean, I guess
I'm
you
just
probably mean
curious.
you mean the. I'm assuming you mean something similar to what I mean by we exist, the universe exists, and we can learn something from it. By those 2 things. No, yes, consistency and reliability of reason. So we can learn something about the world around us, and that it's consistent. Yes.
Okay. So another precondition to be able to do science is that we have reliable sense data. Now you're kind of saying that in a different way, I think, right now. You're saying that we have the ability to learn about the world around us. So in order for us to learn about the world around us, we have to have reliable sense data, at least somewhat reliable sense data. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say that that's another precondition for us to be able to do science. All right. So you got uniformity of nature. Now, do you know what uniformity of nature is? Are you familiar with that term?
I believe it means or refers to the consistency of nature. But I'm assuming I'm wrong about that one.
What do you mean by consistency of nature?
I mean that the clouds above us aren't going to turn into jelly beans or something.
Yeah.
Nature acts consistently. Yeah, consistently. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we can expect that the future will resemble the past. So I think that you understand the concept. Now, are you aware that this is a unjustified assumption that we just have to assume, but in order to try to prove it, we have to assume it in the first place? Like you can't actually demonstrate that it's true. And it's called the problem of induction. Are you familiar with that?
Yes. In fact, I believe that the three basic assumptions the arguments you gave, a uniform nature, reliability of reason, and the sense thing, are all just split up from the third basic assumption. These require blind faith, I would assert. In
Hmm.
fact, they have to.
Yes. Right. So we've got uniformity of nature. You understand that, and you understand that we just have to believe it. We can't justify it. And I would argue the same for reasoning. Like, in order to be able to do science, we have to assume that our faculties are correct. And there's no way to actually prove in any reliable way that our reasoning works, because in order to try to prove it, we have to rely on our reasoning, which is the very thing in question. So it also is something that we just have to assume on blind faith. Would you agree with that as well?
100%.
Okay, cool. You know, I get a lot of pushback from atheists on that one, and I'm like, guys, this is really simple stuff. But I'm glad that you understand that. All right, so cool. We talked about properly working sense data. Now, the next one is that doing science assumes that there is a possibility of knowledge. Now, the reason why I say this one is because science is trying to learn or know about the external world, right? It's like the study of the external world. And if we couldn't know anything, if we couldn't actually like come to any reliable or like knowledge claims, if everything was strictly relative and we couldn't, if knowledge wasn't possible, I would argue that doing science would be futile. There would be like no point. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're saying the same thing. I think just in different words. Uh, yeah, pretty much. Also, what's your cat's name, if you don't mind me asking?
Those are not, that's not a cat. That's my daughter. She's inside, and
Oh,
well, it's either my daughter or my son. I don't have a cat.
uh, forget I asked then. Yeah.
No worries. But anyway, so you would agree with what I just said there?
Yes. We have to. If we can't know anything, then there's no point to science. I think the difference in terminology would be that I consider science less of a tool to know about the universe around us and less of a study of it. But it's not worth bickering over.
Can you say that again? You consider science less of a tool and more of a what?
Oh no, sorry, I must have stuttered. I consider science to be more of a tool than a
Hmm.
study of things. Um, a
Okay.
study of things would be like philosophy,
Okay.
and science is simply just a method, it's a tool that we use to understand the world around us better. A very small thing that does not need to be dug into.
Okay. Then yeah, I won't dig into that. I don't think it's super relevant. So if it ends up being, that's fine. We'll get into it. But the last one, and I think there are actually more. I think there are probably like 10 more. But the last one I think that is important is that science presupposes laws of logic. That there are laws of logic that are universal and that are going to be holding their place essentially. So it's not going to be like the law of non-contradiction is going to be in one place and then in a different place it's not going to exist or something like that. So these laws are timeless, universal, these sorts of things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. This is all sounding like the third basic assumption just split into six different parts or seven different parts. So
Okay.
I agree to all of that.
All right, cool. So you said you agree with premise one. So then we both, I think we both can say we understand what I mean by premise one. So then premise two is that if these preconditions lack a plausible explanation under atheism, but are well explained under theism, then assuming them assuming that these preconditions are true, or assuming their reliability, implicitly assumes the truth of theism. So, what do you think about this premise?
Here's where I start to disagree with you, mainly because just because you have an answer does not mean it's a good answer or even the right answer. I mean, it might be a good answer or the right answer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, or sorry, just because your opponent or someone else doesn't have an answer doesn't mean that your answer is automatically the correct one.
Okay, so can you elaborate a little bit? Like, why do you think that that's relevant to this premise? I'm not following that.
Well, because the argument seems to be that because atheism doesn't have an answer and
Mm-hmm.
theism does,
Yeah.
then it would assume that theism is true.
Well, it's not assuming that theism is true. It's saying that science is assuming that theism is true.
I don't see that.
Okay, so I think maybe I can give you an example or an analogy to explain my understanding of this and the logic. And maybe if we talk about that, we'll understand each other better, and we can understand this second premise in a better light. So let's say that you and I are planning a trip to go to Ohio together. Okay. And Ohio's like 1,000 miles, and we're going to drive there in a car. Okay. Now, what do you think that would presuppose? Like the, I'll just tell you. Okay. Would you agree with me that us saying we're going to get in our car, we're going to drive to Ohio, and we're going to, like camp out over there or something? Would that presuppose that the vehicle was going to work?
Yes. I also
Right.
presuppose that Ohio exists and we can travel to it.
Yes. It, very good. Very good. 100% agree. But I'm focused on the car working. So it presupposes that the vehicle is going to work. Now, in order for us to presuppose that the vehicle is going to work, there are certain beliefs that need to be true underneath that presupposition. And what I mean by that is, imagine if you said, like, let's say I said, well, wait a second, why do you think that the vehicle is going to work? And you said, well, I think that the vehicle is going to work because I think that this vehicle is here as a result of a tornado, right? So like there was a tornado that swept through a junkyard mindlessly, and it threw together this car, or this thing that looks like a car, and I think that that's why this car is going to get us to Ohio. And I'm like, that's your theory? That's why you think that this car is going to work? And you're like, yes. And then I say, okay, well, I think that this car is going to work because I believe that this car was made by an intelligent mind who made it to function, to work, to drive people from one place to another reliably. So I think that this car was made by a competent, intelligent mind for the purpose of doing exactly what we expect it to do. Now, would you agree with me that one of those theories undermines the belief that we're going to get to Ohio, and the other theory doesn't undermine the belief that we're going to get to Ohio?
I mean, the the answer I would have given was because it's worked so far, like hasn't broken down yet. But
Yeah.
I assume that breaks the analogy. So
Yeah.
I feel so you're going for or correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to be going for like a watchmaker argument. Essentially, that's not the actual thing. Um, sorry, I forgot what the actual argument is called, but essentially, argument for design, I believe it is what's called.
Teleology? Is that what you're talking about? The
Well,
teleological argument?
teleological argument is that what's called? All right, yes, teleological
Yeah, the
argument.
argument from design. Yeah.
Yes.
Telos, design.
Uh, so the assumption, so I'm assuming scales up to the universe must have a creator because uh, things are created and destroyed, right? And
Yeah, one second.
sorry,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Um, I'm going to write down car analogy because I want to hear your thoughts on this, but you're sounding broken up, and I don't know if it's just me or not. So I'm going to bring in Macrophage because he's requesting, and I want to see if he's hearing the same thing, because you might want to drop out and come back So just give me a second. I don't want you to sound distorted the whole time, but if it's just me, then I can deal with it. Hey, Macrophage, are you there? Oh, what happened? Did he leave? Oh, I guess he left. Okay, he's coming back. All right, sorry about this, everybody. I don't know if it was just me or not.
I'm here. What's up?
Hey, was he sounding strange to you? Was he starting to break up when he was talking?
We can't hear you.
You can't hear
Darwin.
me? You can't hear me? Okay.
I can hear you. Do I sound better
Oh,
now?
yeah, you sound good now. Okay. Well,
Wonderful.
I
Hi,
guess
Macro.
you can hear me. Macrophage can't hear me. Macrophage, you
I
might.
can now. That
Oh,
was
okay,
my
good.
fault.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, yeah, lad, you sound good now. So anyway, you're sorry to interrupt you. You were saying about the car analogy. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, uh, my thoughts would be that my response would be because the car worked so far.
Yeah.
That would be the actual answer I would give. Besides, I wouldn't mention the tornado.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're going for a teleological argument here.
Hmm.
That's the word, right? And
Yeah.
from what pardon, from what I know about the teleological argument, it relies on the idea that things are created and destroyed. Therefore, the universe had a creation and will one day be destroyed. And because the universe can be created and destroyed, it has to have a creator, and the buck stops at God. Is that sound about right?
No, I don't think I've ever heard that argument. I don't know what argument that was. But the
Uh,
teleological argument is basically like the watchmaker argument, which is that there appears to be design, like we see order, purpose, these sorts of things in the universe, and the best explanation for that, so this is like an inductive sort of argument, the best explanation or the best inference is that a mind is responsible for our universe. That would be like the teleological argument. Now, my argument, what I'm bringing up, or my analogy, does have to do with design, but I'm not strictly speaking making a design argument right now. The point of the analogy is to demonstrate that some beliefs about another belief actually undermine that higher order belief, right? So remember, the belief was that our car would get us to Ohio, but if you believe underneath that the reason for the car is that a tornado put it together, well, then that would actually undermine the higher belief that the car would get us to Ohio. So I'm trying to show you the way that I view this, which is that certain theories are actually undermining these higher order beliefs. That's what I'm trying to illustrate with this analogy. Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense. Given the two options, that either it was designed or to narrow through together, I would say one is definitely greater than the other. Um,
Hmm?
However,
Yeah.
we have to keep in mind that there's not just two answers. It's
Okay. Well,
possible
let's
the
talk
car
about that.
spawned out of nowhere.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. So the reason why I just give two answers in this situation is because when it comes to this conversation about theism or atheism, I think there are actually only two answers. And what I mean by that is either at least one God exists or no God exists. Like, I think that that's a clear dichotomy. Would you agree with that or would you disagree with that? Like
I mean,
either, so let me put it to you a different
of
way.
course.
Either there's a mind that's responsible for everything in reality, or we're here in reality and there's no fundamental mind that's responsible, so whatever is responsible for all of reality, whatever caused it or whatever, it's not a mind. So I would say if that's true, then atheism is true. And then if a mind is responsible for all of reality, then that would mean that deism or theism is true. That would mean that it would definitely mean that deism is true at the very least. Would you agree with that or would you disagree?
Um, if I were to come up with a third option, it would probably be that reality is responsible for reality itself. That the
Yeah,
buck
but
stops at the universe. That is the third
Yeah, but
option.
that would mean that, well, that when you say reality, you mean something mindless, right? Not with a mind.
Oh yeah, in that case, yeah, two options.
Mm. Okay, so you agree it's a dichotomy.
Yeah, between atheism and theism, yes.
Okay, and you would agree with that definition that I gave, which is that if theism is true, then a mind is responsible for everything, like everything else.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So that's why I gave you just two uh, scenarios or two theories in my hypothetical, because just like in that analogy that I gave with the car and the tornado, there are two theories. And in this conversation between atheism and theism, there's essentially two theories. Like either fundamentally we all come from something that's not a mind, or we all come from a mind. Does that make sense?
Yes. The difference between discussing atheism versus theism and the car analogy is that there is also a third option with the car analogy, which is the car created itself,
Mm-hmm.
um, rather than being intelligently designed or being thrown together randomly by a tornado. There are other
Well,
options. I mean, I get
yeah,
I get where you're going
yeah,
for. I'm just saying that may not be the best analogy.
yeah. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a tornado, but the point is that either the car came about through an intelligence, like an intelligent mind put the car together for driving, right? Like the car's there for the purpose of driving because of a mind, or the car's there and it has nothing to do with the mind, it has nothing to do with intentionality, and it has something to do with like something mindless, right? Like like odds, probability, chance, these sorts of things, right?
Yeah, I could pick up minutia, but I'm just going to go ahead and bite because I want this conversation to actually continue. So
Okay.
yes, two options: the
Okay.
unintentional or intentional design.
Yeah. So if these were the only two options in this scenario, this analogy that I gave with the car, wouldn't you agree that if we both thought that we could get the car to Ohio together, would you agree that we were presupposing my theory and not your theory?
Um, wait. So if we both thought different things,
Well, let's say like there are two theories, but we don't really know. We haven't really actually thought about the tornado theory, but we're like, hey man, we're gonna go over to Ohio and our car's gonna get us there. Would you say that we're presupposing that a mind has made that car?
not necessarily. If the tornado can throw the car together randomly just fine. Um,
Would you trust a car that was thrown together randomly by a tornado
if the
to work?
car thrown together by the tornado didn't hasn't broken yet, yeah, I guess it pretty cool. I guess.
Well, let's say
No,
you
we're getting
didn't,
it.
let's say you couldn't know if it worked, right? Because we don't know if any of these preconditions are actually true, right? Remember, we talked about that. So we don't know if our reasoning works. We don't know if the law, if the uniformity of nature is going to hold. These are things that we assume, all right? So we can't, we don't know if the car is going to work. We don't know like that the car has worked. So the question is, are we presupposing, if we think that the car is going to get us to Ohio, are we presupposing that the car is made for that purpose by an intelligent mind? Would you agree with that?
If we're trusting the car to get us to Ohio, I think we're presupposing the car will work regardless of how it was made.
Really? So like if the car was made by mindless ants or something, or a tornado, you think that that would make just as much sense?
Well, no, that's ridiculous because
Yeah.
ants and tornadoes typically don't make cars.
Well, that's not the point. The point is that if ants or tornadoes put together something that looked like a car, it would be irrational or unreasonable to expect it to work, wouldn't it?
I mean, is it a car or does it only look like a car?
Well, you don't know. We think it.
Well,
We think it looks like a car, and we think it's going to get us to Ohio, right?
Well, if I have no reason to assume that it's not a car, then yeah. But if I have a reason to assume it isn't a car, then no. I I think I know what you're trying to get at here. It just the analogy doesn't really work very well in this
Okay.
scenario.
Okay, well, why do you feel like the analogy doesn't work? Because what I'm trying, let me explain what I'm trying to do with the analogy. What I'm trying to do with the analogy is show that some beliefs undermine other beliefs. Like, we want our beliefs to work well together. And if there's a fundamental belief that we hold that doesn't work well with the higher level beliefs, then we should reject that fundamental belief, or we need to reject the higher order beliefs that are undermined by that first belief. So let me give you another example really quickly. I think you'll understand this one and agree with me. Imagine if I believed that we're made by an evil God. Okay. So if I thought that we must be the product of an evil God, I would argue that that argument would be self defeating, because if an evil God made us, we couldn't rely on our reasoning in the first place, right? Because in order for me to look around and be like, well, this looks like the product of an evil God, I'm assuming that what that God gave me, which is my brain and my thoughts, are reliable. And I'm relying on them to conclude that this God is evil. But that assumption wouldn't make sense if God was evil, because if God is evil, he would be likely duping me all the time, right? Or giving me a totally messed up brain, right? That wasn't working correctly. So I shouldn't be able to rely on my thinking in the first place. So what I'm saying is, like, if you're going to presuppose a God, you almost have to presuppose a trustworthy God. You can't really presuppose an evil God, because that would undermine the ability to reason clearly in the first place. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I would, yeah, agree that it would have to be a trustworthy God, not necessarily a good God, because I could definitely see a scenario where a evil God gives you faculties and consistent faculties just so you can experience your suffering realistically, I guess. I think I know where you're going with this, though, and I'm willing to just bite for the sake of conversation. I do not want to be. I'm not trying to be difficult here. I promise.
Yeah,
I'm
no
just, yeah.
worries. No worries.
So I'm willing to bite for conversation.
Okay, cool. And we can always come back to this, later on if we need to. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explain where I'm coming from in all this. I'm trying to explain how some beliefs, right? Like, so, like the belief that I just gave you, God is evil, would undermine the higher belief, which is like that I can rely on my reasoning. And in the same way, if you believe that your car is put together by a tornado mindlessly, that would undermine the higher level belief that you could rely on your car to get you to Ohio, right? I mean, like, think about it. If you seriously, if you went to a car shop, all right, and you took your car there to get an oil change, and then, like, let's say you watch on the camera as, like, a 5-year-old goes out there and he takes apart the whole engine and doesn't look like he knows anything about engines or anything, right? And he, like, takes it all apart, and then he, like, puts the engine back in, and there's, like, pieces, on the floor and stuff like that. It's possible that he knew what he was doing, right? But I don't think that you would get in that car and expect it to work, right? You'd be like, yeah, I'm pretty sure my engine's completely broken now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it would have to be one hell of a talented 5-year-old. I would not hop in that thing.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, if a 5-year-old, if we wouldn't reasonably expect a 5-year-old to work on an engine competently, it definitely wouldn't be reasonable to expect a tornado to put a car engine together competently, right?
Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna bite for the sake of conversation. Yes, it would not be
Okay.
reasonable to assume a tornado could put the thing together.
Yeah.
The argument, or what I'm trying to state here, is not is that there is that there's not just two answers. I guess. Hold on, I need to go back. I need to reread this because I think we got a little off the beaten path here.
Okay. Sure.
All right. Um. Actually, no. There are just two answers here. Yeah. Uh. Yeah. Well, okay. So what I will say to pull myself out of this hole is that just because we have a theistic answer does not mean that that theistic answer is the correct theistic answer. There could
Yeah,
be theism
right.
could work in different in more ways than just how we or how anyone assumes theism works. And
Yeah,
also it's also possible that maybe the atheist is a big dumb dumb and doesn't know how to doesn't know the answer or doesn't explain the answer very well in an argument,
hmm
uh, like I may or may not be doing here. So just because one answer seems unreasonable does not automatically mean the other answer is correct. You have to kind of prove that the answer that you give is correct, and not just
yeah,
your opponent's answer is a little silly. If that makes sense.
right. So if you look at premise 2, it says if these preconditions lack a plausible explanation under atheism, but are well explained under theism, then assuming them implicitly assumes the truth of theism. So the reason why I brought up the car analogy is in the car analogy, we're implicitly assuming that our car was put together like by a mind for the purpose of driving, because like if the car was put together for a different purpose and it wasn't to transport people, it would still be unreasonable to expect it to get us to another place. Like we know the purpose of a pen. So even though a pen is put together by an intelligent agent, we wouldn't be reasonable if we expected a pen to get us to Ohio, right? Or something like that, or a tub, right? Like, because that's not a tub's purpose, but a vehicle's purpose, that is what it is made for. So what I'm saying is that if these preconditions lack a plausible explanation under atheism, but are well explained under theism, then assuming them implicitly assumes the truth of theism. So just like in that example, the theory that the engine is made by a tornado would make the other belief that we're going to get to Ohio implausible, right? It would be implausible that that would be true. But it would be totally plausible for it to be true that the car would get us to Ohio if it's made by an intelligent agent. So therefore, in that situation, we're implicitly assuming that the car is made by an intelligent agent. So that's the logic.
Okay. Um, I am willing to just, for the sake of us finishing on a decent time, saying I'll buy on premise 2. If you answer me one question, does I don't know count as a reasonable answer, or I have no way of knowing?
Well, I don't know if it's reasonable. I mean, you're just saying that you don't know. So it's not really like an argument, I'm making an argument, right? Like I'm saying if your engine, like if you between these two theories, if one of those theories undermines the idea that we can get to Ohio, then either we're not driving to Ohio together, right? Um, or we need to reject this theory that tornado put together a car, So like you can always fall back on I don't know, but we're trying to reason through these things. And I mean, yes, you can say I don't know, but I'm trying to give you a good reason why we should assume these preconditions for science, which you agreed with me on that, and why those preconditions point to or implicitly assume God instead of atheism.
Um, Okay, so the only problem I'm having, I guess, the scenario is that it's not really mapping onto what atheism is. Let me explain. Like a more accurate analogy would be and this still works in your favor. A more accurate analogy would be we're both trying to get to Ohio, and we see the car, and we're running. Oh, does this car work? One guy says, "Oh, the car works because it was made by intelligent. This car is made by an intelligent mind, therefore it should work." And
Yeah.
the other guy says, I don't know what the car came from. I don't know how the car was made." That's a
hmm
more accurate analogy. Um,
Okay. Well, either remember this is a dichotomy, right? So either everything comes from a mind or it doesn't. So if somebody said, I don't know where this car came from, they simply don't understand the dichotomy and they don't belong in the conversation, right?
I guess I don't belong in the conversation then, because that would be my
Well, you
analogy.
said that you understood the dichotomy. You agreed with it.
Yeah, but like, okay, I'm just. I understood. I understood dichotomy that either came from either it came from intelligent mind or it didn't come from intelligent mind. I'm saying that under that dichotomy, I'm saying in this scenario where we're saying where this car come from, the atheist argument would be I don't know where the car came from, not the car came from a tornado. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if there's only two options, right, then we can say that if theism is false or if it didn't come from God, then whatever it came from, we do have some information about it. Whatever it came from is mindless at the end of the day, right? So even if like I made the car or whatever produced me and whatever produced the thing that produced me, when you get to the end of that line, you're going to end up with something that has no mind, right? So at the end of the line, whatever is responsible for our fundamental reality is mindless. And everything is the result of something mindless. So we don't have to be super specific, right?
If everything is the result of something mindless, then wouldn't that make atheism true? Because
Yeah, if that were
either
true. I'm arguing it's not true.
okay, thank you. Yeah, just making sure.
Yeah. So I don't think that the atheist needs to be like super specific and tell us exactly what this mindless thing is. I just think that if atheism is true, everything ultimately comes from something without a mind. And if theism is true or deism, then everything ultimately comes from something with a mind. It's that simple.
I mean, there again, there's a third option, which is the well, never mind. We've already covered it, but it's just the term it comes from something without a mind doesn't quite cover the possibility that it created itself, right? Um,
Well,
okay, for
I
example,
yeah.
you're making a car, right? So you want to construct a car because we're
Hmm.
talking about driving to Ohio because we want to go to Ohio for some unknown reason. Um,
Hmm.
the car. When someone creates the car, do they snap their fingers and the particles and the materials come out of nowhere to create a car, or do they assemble material that's already there to create a car?
When someone wants to create a car, do they snap their fingers and create a car? Is that what you asked?
Do they create the material to make the car, or do they assemble material that's already there?
Oh, they assemble material that's already there.
Okay. Um, Now, so the design argument basically comes from the fact that people we need comes to this, the observation that
Hmm.
we assemble that we create things by assembling objects that's already there.
Hmm.
Um, and then it takes that and scales that back to something outside the universe, create the universe, like create all the material in the universe. The material wasn't there before God was there. God created all the material in the universe, right?
I think I think you might be misunderstanding the design argument. That's definitely not how I would put it. Can I tell you how I would put it briefly?
Go for it.
So the way I would put the design argument is that we have minds and we observe when our minds make things what the indicators of design are. So for example, if I walk into my living room and I find Legos all around the place, strewn all about, I'm not necessarily going to be like, a mind did that, right? Because somebody could have like, maybe the Legos just fell out of a bag and they got kicked around. So there was like no intentionality there because the Legos are just scattered around all over the place. But if I see those Legos are stacked into a castle, right? Then I'm gonna be like, okay, who did that? Was that my daughter? That she is smart as a whip. And the reason why I assume that there's a designer now is because of the indicators. That's the key word, the indicators of design. What indicators of design does a castle have? It has order. Um, it has complexity because different Legos are used in different places. It's got specificity because each Lego had to be placed directly on top of another Lego. So it's incredibly unlikely that, somehow like wind or some kind of mindless force would be able to do that, right? And then you might even have beauty in there. So there are indicators that we observe in this, or that I'm observing when I look at this Lego castle, and I'm like, because I see all these indicators, that means there's a designer. And then the design argument says, okay, we know that these are indicators of design because we see it all the time. We see minds doing these things. And so we also see these same indicators in the world around us, like human beings, or the fine tuning, or just the intelligibility of our world itself, meaning that we can make sense of the world. All of these things, we see order, we see complexity. All these things point to a designer, the same way that my daughter's Lego castle points to a designer. That's how I would put the design argument.
All right, so the design argument isn't that God created the world, but God simply designed the world.
Yeah, it's basically saying that either the world is designed or not. We see tons of indicators all over the world of design, and therefore the best explanation for the world is that there's a designer, which is a mind.
So a God doesn't have to create to be God. He could simply be a designer, right?
Well, he would be a creator and a designer in this case, right? Because once again, either everything comes from a mind or it doesn't. So if everything is, if there is a designer, then the designer would have to be God at the end of the day, right? So God would have to be creator.
Oh, sorry. I did not mean to interrupt you there.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so blah, blah, blah. Saying that God can either be a creator or designer. Would you? But design argument only really takes you to designer. It doesn't really take you to creator, though. The same way that your daughter only designed the Lego castle, she didn't make the Legos.
Yeah, well, once again, remember, it's either that there's a God that's responsible for all of reality, or there isn't. And so if all of reality either comes from a mind or it doesn't, and when we look at reality, we see indicators of a mind because of all the indicators of design, which we know it indicates mind. Therefore, we should conclude that God is responsible for all the design that we see, and therefore all of reality should come from a mind. I think that follows, don't you?
Yeah, it definitely follows all the way to God designed the world, not that God created the material and then designed the world. It's possible from the design argument alone, at least, that the material already existed and then God designed the world with the material that already existed. I'm saying that's as far as the design argument takes you, not that it's wrong or something.
Okay. Well, do you want to stay on there, or do you want to? I feel like we should move to premise 4, because I think that you agreed with premise 3, which is that these preconditions must be assumed in order to do science. You said you were good on 1 and 3. I feel like we should talk about 4 a little bit at least before we open it up. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I apologize for I guess bogging this down a little bit.
No.
It took way longer than I thought it would. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. These things are very difficult to explain. So I actually think that we're making pretty good time, frankly. All right, so premise 4 says these preconditions lack a plausible explanation under atheism, but are well explained under theism. All right, so that's premise 4. Now, do you understand why I say that based on what I've said so far?
Yes, and the lack of plausible explanation on the atheism would be because atheism doesn't really have an answer. If that's what you
Yeah.
consider lacking a plausible thing, then yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah,
Argument
so
holds.
let me explain. I'll try to go through this quickly. So let's talk about uniformity of nature. So if everything comes from a mind, I think that we can reasonably expect uniformity of nature on theism, because if God made everything, especially us, then he would want us. It would make sense for him to want us to have regularity to be able to make sense of the world. So if the world was constantly changing, if the laws of physics and these sort of things were changing all the time on us, then we really couldn't interact with the world in any kind of reasonable way. You know what I mean? I mean, like if you were to design a game and you wanted the people in the game to be able to play it, you wouldn't make it so that it was like chaos in the game, right? You would have like some stability within that game so that people could interact with the world and kind of know what to expect in that world. So I think that with a creator, just as if you were to make a game, you would build in some reliability, some uniformity. We can expect that also with a creator of the universe, but if there's no mind that's responsible for the universe, then the universe is, or all of creation comes from something mindless, and everything is really like the product, I would argue, of something like chance. And if that's the case, then I don't think that we have a good justification for thinking that there will be uniformity of nature.
Okay, so it all comes from chance. Reminds me of the puddle analogy. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah, so the puddle analogy has to do with fine tuning, and that's not what I'm talking about.
Well,
Unless
it is kind of what
you
you're talking about. It's just like everything came from chance, and the reason that we know that the universe came from creator, or if it came from a mindless thing, then to get what we have now, it couldn't have come from chance. Is that not the argument?
Well, the argument is that if it comes from chance, then we should expect like chaos. Okay, we shouldn't expect order and regularity and these sorts of things. Like one, think about this: if you had a code, like a random code that was making a video game, something mindless, right? Like a cat walking across the keyboard, you wouldn't expect, if that cat were to somehow even create a world in the first place that was intelligible, it would be unreasonable to expect reliability or uniformity, right? Like consistent laws. That would be very, very surprising if that world was somehow the product of something mindless like chance, right? Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I would argue that if there was no intelligibility or uniformity, and just pure chaos, the world wouldn't exist at all. So
Yeah.
for a world to exist by chance, it would have to roll. It would have to roll that it was uniform, intelligible. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah. Well, see, to
So
me,
the fact that we were here, so if we assume the world came from chance and assume that we're here, then we would have to assume as well that the world rolled uniformity of intelligence just so we can even be here in the first place. Does that make sense?
yeah. But I think that once again, if we go back to the car analogy, what you're kind of saying here is like, well, we see a car and we know that the car is working. Like, let's say you and I are driving to Ohio, and you're like, because the car is working, it must be that the tornado put everything together just so that the car would work. And I'm sitting there next to you, and I'm like, no. Because the car is working, we shouldn't think that a tornado put this bad boy together. That's illogical, I'm saying no, the car's working, so we should presuppose that this is put together by an intelligent source. Do you see the difference?
It, it feels like we're going back to a false dichotomy again that we kind of moved on from. Um, like yeah no. What I'm saying is if we knew for a fact the tornado put the car together, if we knew for a fact to put the car together, and we knew for a fact that the car worked and we get to Ohio, then we'd have to assume that the tornado put the car together in a way that just so happened to get to Ohio, right?
Yeah, well, see,
Otherwise,
that's the
the
thing.
car
We
would
don't know if it's
Ohio.
the tornado or not. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you finished?
I was finished. Yeah, sorry. No sweat.
Okay. So the thing is that we don't know if the tornado put the car together or not. We don't know if the tornado comes from a car. Sorry. Sorry. We don't know if the car comes from a tornado or from an intelligent designer. But if we're driving to Ohio and the car seems like it's working well, it's not reasonable to be like, well, I guess it was the tornado that put this thing together, right? Remember, the 5-year-old, you'd be like, I'm not going to expect that to work. So if we don't expect a 5-year-old to be able to put a car together or an engine together, we definitely shouldn't expect a tornado to put an engine together such that it could work.
Okay, I'm gonna give you this much. it would be really, really, there would be like a less than 0.1% chance that tornado put that car together if it got
Yeah.
to Ohio. That doesn't mean that's a 0% chance. That doesn't mean that it's
Yeah.
not happening. It just means it's rare.
Right, and that's why I'm using the word implausible. Like it's very, very implausible. Like if some children were going to play soccer against the best team in the world, like the best professional team in the world, it's possible that the children win, right? Like that's technically possible. But no one in their right mind would think that the children would win that game, right?
Right, of course.
Yeah.
I would
So
not put
that's
money on
what
that.
I'm saying. So just because it's possible that the tornado could put the car together, that doesn't mean that anyone in their right mind should believe that a tornado put the car together.
Okay, I'm gonna say fair enough for the sake of argument.
Okay.
There are a few things that I would like to say if we had a little more time. But that would get us another 2 hours, and so for the sake of just brevity and not ruining your Twitter space, we're going to say yes.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that. So I'll just go probably one or two more real quick. So the other one that I think is important is sound reasoning. So remember, we're talking about preconditions to do science, and I'm saying that the best explanation for these preconditions being true is theism, like the most plausible. And so the precondition now that I want to discuss is sound reasoning. And just like it wouldn't be rational to think that that car would work if it's put together by a mindless tornado. The ability to reason soundly requires an unbelievable amount of complexity, to put it mildly. And so the fact that we rely on our brains, I think implicitly assumes, and we have to rely on our brains. Like we have to think that our brains are reliable in order to do science. And I think that I think that that implicitly assumes that our brains are made for the purpose of reasoning, of learning about the external world. And I think that if you really believe that our brains are the product of some kind of mindless chance, then that actually undermines the belief that we would have sound reasoning in the first place. Just like
I
with,
disagree.
okay,
Uh, I because it's possible for us to still have the ability to reason and learn about the world around us, even if our
yep.
brains were created purely through chance, just dice rolls.
Well,
I,
remember, we're talking about plausible, not just possible, right? Like it's possible I'll flap my arms really, really hard and be able to fly, right? Like that's possible. But you wouldn't believe me if I said I was going to do it, right? You'd be like, that's nonsense, bro.
all right. Um, I do not know how to put this correctly. Yeah, you know, you're right. You're right. It would be a lot more likely that if you flapped your hands, it would not go. It would not go. But that's just because. Whatever. So you said plausible, not possible, right?
Yeah. I'm saying
In
it's
that case,
incredibly
yeah, go ahead.
implausible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go. For
sorry.
it.
Sorry,
I
what I'm
heard possible. I heard possible. That's on me.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that it's incredibly implausible on the theory of atheism that we would be able to rely on our reasoning. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's incredibly implausible. But on theism, if God made us in order to reason, then that would actually make perfect sense why we would be able to rely on our reasoning in order so that we could do science. So that the theory of theism makes perfect sense why we would rely on our reasoning. The theory of atheism is like, I'm gonna flap my wings, or sorry, flap my arms really hard and fly. It's like, okay, you can believe that, but that's crazy. It's super impossible.
I don't think. I think if you go from okay, so if you go forward with the argument, it makes sense. But I don't think you can reliably go backwards with it. Um, I should probably explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
If you operate off the assumption that our brains were designed to see the world around us, and that there is a God there is a God that designed our brains, then it would be reasonable to assume that God designed our brains to see the world around us. But if you're just operating off of our brains can perceive the world around us, you can't really go backwards with that to God. I don't think you can do that reasonably or reliably.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I follow. So you're saying go backwards. So let me make sure I'm tracking here, because I'm saying that, remember, there's two theories. Either everything comes from a mind or it doesn't, right? And I'm saying that the theory that everything comes from a mind would be, it would make perfect sense why we would be able to rely on our reasoning. And if everything doesn't come from a mind, it would be incredibly implausible that we would be able to rely on our reasoning, because we're not even made to reason. Like like we wouldn't be made for any purpose. So a car that, or something that looked like a car but is just the result of something mindless, it would be very implausible that the car would function like a car and work properly, right? Like as a car. That would be incredibly surprising. So that's what I'm saying. uh, am I miss like so what are you trying to say to that?
Okay, so my argument is okay. So how do I explain this well? Um, if you are assuming, right,
Hmm.
that our minds are designed, and they're designed by a designer, and the designer designed those minds to interpret the world around us, that
Yeah.
logic goes well forward, right? If you go from designer to design to mind, right, that works cohesively. But if you're starting with mind, you can't really go backwards to designer, because there's also always a possibility, right? There's in fact a 50% chance that the mind wasn't even designed at all,
So why do you say 50-50? I'm confused.
because it's a binary. Either those are
Okay.
two options, either yes or no. It's a binary 50
Oh,
50. Um,
well, if you and I were driving to Ohio in a car, and the car was working, and we had to believe that the car was going to work and get us to Ohio, would you say that it was 50-50 that the car was made by a tornado versus an intelligent mind? Or would you say that if we're going to
if
rely on that
if
car,
there are two options, if
50?
there are two options,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, and you okay, uh, why don't we just move on, either move on or open up the floor? I think we're going in circles here.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
it's either that, or
Anyway.
fighting you on the idea that designer designed us to interpret the world around us. And I
Yeah.
feel
No, no. If you want to
well,
open it up, we can do that.
let's open up.
So yeah. So you understand the argument, I think, right? All right. So if anybody would like to come up and join us for this conversation, I have 45 minutes left until 10 o'clock. I told my wife I'd be done at 10, and I am going to do my absolute best to uh, keep my word. So if you guys would like to come up and join us, please come up. Remember, please be kind, especially to my host. Be respectful. Let's have a good, productive conversation. And that's pretty much my only rule. All right. So I see Bruce Wayne is requesting. He's a cool dude. And Scott M has requested. Oh, yeah. And if you guys want to talk, just put your hand up and I will call on you in the order that I see you. So, Bruce Wayne, you're up first. What's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. It's great to see you, man.
Well, to start off, one, Darwin, you're good at this, you're good with at the Socratic method. You are.
Oh,
Um, you, I'm pretty sure you've probably read some Socrates, haven't you?
uh, not as much as you might think, but a little bit.
But you are good at it. I'll tell you that. One, got a couple things here. One, I was taking some notes here. One is at the beginning, one of the things that you guys both of you forgot to do is explain like what science, the definition of what science is. Before
Okay. Yeah.
we got into it, it's like a systematic way of understanding the world around us, using observation, experimentation, and logical reasoning to form testable hypotheses, theories, and to explain natural phenomena. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's kind of what it is. Science, and that is, as we understand it, doesn't touch on the metaphysical world in the science that we kind of know it to be. And one of the things is too is one of the other things that I had here too is
Would you like to discuss these one at a time?
yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm past the science thing.
Well, you said it didn't touch on the metaphysical world, so do you want to
Well,
discuss that first before we go into your next one, or did you just kind of want to say that?
well, one is where well, like I said, science doesn't explain the metaphysical world. The science that we understand and we know. I mean, that like biology, every the natural. It focuses on the natural world. The
Mhm.
metaphysical world, where the assumptions that God is responsible, or gods, however many you believe in or not, that's out of the realm of science. But the other thing that I was kind of looking at was the and this is what it is, the teleological argument, the
Mhm.
kind of with Pele and all that.
Right.
One of the things is that there's a comparison there. We're kind of comparing two things that are observably like man-made, like that are observably man-made, like you said, a car, or like Pele's watch, and things that aren't man-made,
Mm-hmm.
that I don't see. Because the thing is, we're looking at I always keep forgetting this word, anthropomorphic kind of a lens, in a sense.
Yeah.
Or because we see things as anthropocentric. We see things that instead of that we apply purpose to things. That's kind of how it looks to us, rather than just say, God, how did I put this? Typed everything down here, and I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, no worries.
I apologize for that.
No, you're fine. Do you mind if I get a little bit of clarity?
Yes, one last thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have to point this out here. Atheism isn't, in general, for both of you, atheism isn't a worldview. It's a single position on a single topic. It's just lack of belief that there is a God, or something like that. There's no extra thing to it. That's it. Like, a worldview would be like naturalism, or
Did you listen to the whole conversation?
I was yes, I was right. I was writing things down as I was going along. So
Okay.
at periodic times, my attention was there.
Well, I'm curious why you're bringing up the atheism as a worldview, because obviously, if somebody says, I don't believe in God, they're an atheist, right?
Yes.
Right. So when I say atheism or theism, I'm talking about the metaphysical belief or claim that God doesn't exist. I understand that there are lack theists, but I'm saying that for the sake of this conversation, just shorthand, atheism means God doesn't exist. Because if God doesn't exist, then atheism would be true, right? Like if there's no God, if that turned out to be true, that would mean that atheism was true. Um, if you're defining it as the belief that no God exists, so that to me is what's relevant in the conversation. Like we don't even have to use the word atheism or theism. We can say either it's true that God exists or God doesn't exist, and if no God exists, then everything comes from something without a mind, which is what we were doing most of the conversation anyway, I think.
Yeah, we were. I wasn't arguing from the perspective that that I don't lack that I lack belief completely. I was
Yeah.
arguing from the perspective of atheism, because that's just, we're having a philosophical discussion here. Even though, yes, you Batman, you are 100% right that 99% of atheists who claim to be atheists simply lack a belief in God. I lack a belief in God. But when I'm in a philosophical discussion with a theist like this, I have to take on the mantle of atheist, even though it's a much harder position to defend. That is simply just the nature of a philosophical discussion. But I appreciate you butting in, Bruce. Bruce Wayne, go back to fighting crime, man. You're doing a good job of it.
But yeah, yeah. Like I said, I have a whole pile of notes here, and I'm trying to.
Do you guys know each other? Bruce is pretty cool. I think he and I are going to do a space here pretty soon. I'm hoping we're able to work it out.
If my days off ever line up.
I've never met the guy before, but Bruce sounds like a cool dude.
Yeah,
I would look forward to watching it.
Yeah, we had a conversation in private, and I was like, yeah, we definitely need to do a space. And he said he's willing, so hopefully we can make that happen.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bruce, is there anything that you'd like for me to address that you said?
Well, here's the thing. One is when we're looking at this, we have to look at it as this, that is that that claiming God is responsible, like we're saying here, like even the probability of improbability. I mean, even claiming that a God is responsible for this isn't an established law, or isn't a 100% thing. It's just, I guess it's subjective to the individual. Like if it makes sense to you and it adds up, that's one thing. But it's more of a metaphysical assumption than it is a supported conclusion. Because we haven't breached verifiably or even empirically. We haven't breached that boundary between that. If there was a God, that separates us from him, in a sense, to kind of be able to demonstrate and test that there is one.
Okay. Would you like me to respond to that?
You can, yeah.
Okay. So my thoughts on that are, I think I understand where you're coming from. I believe what you're saying is that there's no way for us to really know one way or the other, and we kind of like have these arguments, and whatever seems like makes sense, we just kind of go with that. So the theists are like, well, it seems like there's mind, and the atheists are like, well, it seems like there isn't, and we really can't test either one. So it's just kind of like two theories. Is that right? Do I have you correct?
In a sense, yeah, because that if you boil it down to its simple, to its bare bones, it's kind of what it is, because it's not a certain it's not a certain thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the thing is not absolute. It's not absolute certainty in that sense, because we can't and this dives into it, and I'm just probably going to cut it off. I do have a whole list of notes that I want to go through, but that's going to take too long. But
well, we know you love your notes.
But I have medical memory issues, so I have to write everything down. But I mean, you can't say for absolutely certain that there is, because for example, if we would have to know, it's absolute certainty, so can't have absolute certainties, because if you can't know that there is a God for absolutely certain, because if knowledge requires absolute certainty, then how do we know that knowledge requires absolute certainty? It boils down to kind of like that gets stuck there. We kind of have to make informed inferences of whether there is or is not one.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to point out that what you're saying right now is not really about the topic of the space. Like, you would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Because the topic of the space is about whether or not science presupposes God, and you're talking about whether or not there's any good reason, right?
I think what I'm doing, and I think you're right on this, is I'm actually going through different points, point by point, rather than the whole issue itself.
Well, I do want to address.
May I cut in real quickly, if you don't mind? I think what Bruce is trying to say is, and I think I agree with you. By the way, there is no way we can. God is a supernatural being, so there's no way we can prove, or we can know 100% whether he exists or not. I believe that's what you're trying to get at. Is that correct?
Yes, because because science doesn't assume theism is true. Science operates under methodological naturalism, meaning it seeks natural explanations for observable phenomena and does not assume supernatural causes, including God.
Yeah,
And
but
that,
see, that's the thing though, is and I expected that to come up a lot earlier, but I think that you're confusing causes, like science doesn't look for supernatural causes, with the preconditions for science, which is that God must exist, or it's incredibly plausible that God exists in order for us to make sense of the preconditions of science in the first place.
well,
So it's two different things that we're talking about.
well,
Now, I agree that when we do science, we look for scientific answers because science has to deal. It has to do with making an observation, and we need regularity of nature, and we're looking at physical stuff. So because science naturally deals in the realm of like observable phenomena, like the material world, it's not going to try and delve into like supernatural stuff because that's not what it's for. But that doesn't mean that it's not assuming the supernatural.
well, no,
Okay.
well, no, that's not what not nec- not necessarily what I said. It says, is it seeks at, it seeks natural explanations for observable phenomena, and does not,
Because that's all it can observe. That's
yeah,
fine.
and does not assume natural causes, including God or gods or whoever. But
Hmm.
and I have a whole thing on that, but I'm not going to go into it. But the thing is, which means
Well, that's the whole argument, right?
which means it doesn't immediately assume, hey, this happened, this happened because God. It, we like, for example, photosynthesis can grow. It doesn't assume God had something to do with it. It just says, oh well, the on the cellular level this happens. It retains light, all that wonderful stuff.
Well, that's not the argument I'm making, right?
The argument you're making, I think, is after the results come in, and
No, it's before, it's prior to. It's prior to even doing the science. You're talking about surface level science, like making observations and stuff. And I'm saying in order to even make the observations or in order to even rely on our reasoning, that already needs to be assuming that there's a fundamental mind that's responsible for all of this. That's my argument. I'm not saying that when science sees natural phenomena or whatever, that it's like, oh, the cause must be God. I'm not like or like the cause must be an angel or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that science assumes whenever it observes stuff that what's responsible is God. What I'm saying is that science assumes that God is responsible for the preconditions of science in the first place to be able to do science, like uniformity of nature, sound reasoning, laws of logic, these things.
you're you're not saying that science. I mean, the scientific method, I mean, doesn't presuppose theism. It's just neutral towards it. But what you're saying is, in order for science to be done, or to be done, or I guess you could say, if you go all the way back, for it to even take place or something like that, there has to be a mind behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, now that,
Yeah. So it's like God is a precondition to the preconditions to do science.
okay, now that, I don't think science assumes that. I'd say that's more of a metaphysical.
Well, that's the argument. You're going to have to go back and listen to the whole
Well,
thing. But
yeah, well, I understand that, but that's more of a metaphysical assumption than anything.
well, I've given my reasons for why
No,
I'm saying
I got you. I got you. I understand. But
yeah.
I'm not going to take anyone else's time here. Sorry about that.
All right, no worries, man. Yeah, if you go back or whatever and you listen to this and you want to talk in DMs, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
You know, yeah, I'll have to go back so I don't have to take notes and then pop back in and out intermittently.
All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and move on to Macrophage because he's had his hand up for a while. And everybody else, if you would like to speak, go ahead and put your hand up. I don't see any other hands right now, but I do see Stanley as requested, so let me add him as a speaker. And Macrophage, what's going on, man? Good to see you.
Hey, so I want to bring up something that Lad said at the very beginning about science being a tool. And I just wanted to ask you, Lad, if what you're saying there is that you're some kind of scientific anti-realist or instrumentalist. Oh, he's gone.
Yeah, I see he's requesting that
Oh,
he's probably.
maybe he had a hiccup and is trying to come back in.
Yeah, I'm gonna remove him from co-host and then add him back. Hopefully that will work. Add a speaker. Yeah, no,
Anti-realist or something.
Yeah, because you said at the very beginning that you think science is a tool. Does that mean that you're an instrumentalist about scientific theories?
I'm not sure what you mean by instrumentalist. What I mean by science as a tool, I mean is that science isn't like it's not like a belief system. It's just a tool we use to learn about the world around us through trial and error and logic and inference. Uh, that's what I mean by that. If that's instrumentalist, then yeah, I am one.
Okay, I wasn't sure because that's actually a pretty standard description of instrumentalism is that you say science is like a tool rather than a set of propositions or beliefs. So, for example, um, we could make a proposition: gravity is a force, and then you could either believe that that is actually true or not true. That would be like a scientific realist position would say, yes, gravity is a force, or no, gravity is not a force. In other words, you deny or affirm the propositional belief that gravity is a force. But an instrumentalist would say, no, we just model gravity as a force in Newtonian mechanics solely as a tool to help us do things in nature, like go to the moon, um, calculate, trajectories of, ballistics and stuff like that. So I guess the question is, the real question as to whether or not you're a realist or an anti-realist would be, um, do you think that the statement gravity is a force is some kind of propositional belief statement that is either true or false?
Um, I guess I'm not. I'm sorry. You're using terminology that I'm not really familiar with.
Okay. Well, I'm
Yeah,
trying to compliment you because that was I thought
oh,
you
thank
were
you.
I thought what you said, it sounded like you're way more read than it sounds like you actually are. So
Oh no! Do not believe. I am an uneducated slob. I do not do not believe your ears. I only sound intelligent. All right, but thank you. I
okay.
appreciate it.
No. I mean, I think you've hit on something that is actually a really complex issue in philosophy of science. So let me throw something by you. This might not actually be relevant anymore, but because I thought so. Anyway, there was a philosopher of science named Hilary Putnam, who was a scientific realist, and he argued that scientific realism is the only philosophy that doesn't make the success of science a miracle. Okay, so what he means by that is that if our scientific theories are actually true, so like let's say general relativity or some theory, right, is actually true about the universe, then that would make sense of why the theory works so well to describe how nature works. Okay. Whereas on an anti-realist position, you'd say, no, the theory is not actually true, but it just happens. If you're not a theist, you would have to say that it's some kind of real big coincidence that this mathematical construct that humans came up with is so good at describing how nature works, even though it's not actually the real deal, right? Whereas as a theist myself, um, and an anti-realist, I can just say, well, yeah, it's true. It could be the case that this theory is not actually the real thing about how nature really works, but it does describe how nature works. Why? Because God designed nature so that it could be easily describable to us and that we could easily figure it out, even though the real truth is probably way more complicated.
I'm gonna. Sorry, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. My bad.
Go
It
ahead.
sounds like you're going from a very I'm here. I'm going to sound intelligent again. A Platonic approach from it, essentially, where things exist for us to be discovered. So, in their perfect form, essentially. So, like, the idea of a perfect car already existed before we built a car. We simply discovered the concept of a car on our own, despite that in fact it already existed in the world of forms. I'm butchering this. I know. I'm sorry, but
No,
that
that's
sounds.
actually really good.
Meanwhile, an Aristotelian view would be more like we created a car, and then the world, and in the world of forms, a perfect version, a vision of it was a perfect version of a car was envisioned and put in there. Wait, no, sorry. Aristotle would be more like the car we created would be the car in the world of forms. I got I got that one mixed up at least. Um, it sounds like you're saying something along those lines. If I'm correct.
Yeah, sort of like if there was an atheist that would take this view, they would have sort of an atheistic Platonism that scientific theories would exist in this world of forms or whatever. But again, I would argue that's kind of, well, I don't know. I suppose I'll have to think about that. But I'll try to bring it back down a little bit here. So I think if people are interested in this topic, a really good book is called Thinking God's Thoughts by Melissa Cain Travis from a Christian perspective. And most of us would argue that it's not just theism that is required to be the foundation of science. We would argue it's actually Christianity in particular. And the main reason being that you can get things like the uniformity of nature from monotheism. So Judaism and Islam are both monotheistic religions. Because other religions, at least in the ancient world, were like pagan, and they had all these creation myths where you had these gods that would fight, right? Not a single one of them had ultimate power. And so the result of them fighting was kind of an accident, and that's the world, right? And so they viewed nature as being in chaos. So, for example, the rules don't necessarily work the same everywhere in the universe. In fact, Aristotle's view was essentially that, and the Western view for a long time, up until the scientific revolution, basically said there are, starting with the moon and the concentric circles around the Earth, because the Earth was at the center in this model, starting with the moon, there's a completely different element that everything's made out of called ether. It's the fifth element. That's why that movie's called The Fifth Element. And it's immutable and perfect. There can be no decay. Everything just keeps going on as the same way it has been going on forever. Whereas in the sublunar region, you have the four terrestrial elements. That's your earth, water, air, and fire. And those can be changed and decay and mutable over time. And so there was a view that there was different rules in the sublunar regions versus the heavens. And other things like that, like where just the rules are different in different places, right? And or if, for example, you're appealing to this god over here, he can make this thing happen because he's the god of rain or whatever. And then this is the god of the sun god. He can do this thing, and they can fight and cause problems, right? That's the kind of chaos that we were coming out of, right? In when Christianity came on the scene. And so, as a matter of just historical fact, Christianity was the reason why we began to assume that, well, no, there's one set of rules that makes nature uniform all over, and it's because nature has a single creator who's all powerful, who has no rivals, and he has the power to make nature all according to an orderly system, exactly how he wants. And the other thing that's unique to Christianity is the Imago Dei doctrine, that human beings are made in the image of God. And that's important because it's not just enough that there's a single God who made the earth made the universe according to a rational singular order, although that's important. We also need to have some faith or reason to believe that we as human beings have minds that are at least capable of understanding that rational order, because you don't do the difficult things that scientists have to do for decades on end, tedious, painstaking work, unless you believe that something's going to come out of it. Because it doesn't look orderly at first. It takes a lot of work to find that order. And you have to believe that you're going to find it. And so the Christian belief that we're made in the image of God is interpreted as we have minds that are like God's mind, not in degree, but sort of like in kind, right? Like his mind is infinite, ours is finite, but we have the same kind of rational faculties that God has. And that means we can figure out and make sense of the world he made because we have a mind like him. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
All right. Just most of that went over my head. So, but please correct me if I summarize this wrong. But what I feel like you were saying was that God created a bunch of scientific principles, a bunch of laws of nature, as in Plato's World of Forms ish, and he entrusts us and he designed us with minds to understand logic, so we could find those rules and so we could find those laws of natures through science, and that would lead us to God. Is that like a good summation of what you're saying?
I didn't say that it would lead us to God. I just I would say similar to what sorry, I forgot Darwin's name actually.
Just call him Darwin. We all do.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think I used to know his name, but anyway, like what he was saying is that it's a presupposition that is required before you would even try to find those rules. Rather than after we find them, it leads us to God.
Okay. So we have to assume that those rules were already there, and those rules existed to be discovered before we can discover what those rules are and use them to learn more about the universe. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I would agree with at least 3/4 of that. Probably because atheist. But I believe that if those rules did exist, the universe itself wouldn't exist. So we wouldn't, be here to not discover those rules that didn't exist. It was a horrible way of putting it. Yeah, I see where you're going with this. That's a very sound argument for the most part. I disagree a little bit, but I would like to give other people a chance to speak. But that was really a really in-depth argument. I appreciate that, Macrophage. You did an amazing job. Way smarter than I am. I hate to admit it.
No, what you're describing is called observer bias, which means that because we're here to see the thing, right, that's the only way we would see the thing. So that gets talked about too. So yeah, you figured out a lot of stuff on your own, man.
I'm sitting here like, yeah, this dude's generally smarter than I am. Jesus Christ.
Well, I've read a lot more on the issue, but you're on the right track. Another book before I shut up. Another book I'd recommend is actually by an atheist named Tom Holland called Dominion. It's an excellent book, and it goes over the history of Western civilization, and he talks a lot about science, including a very interesting example where some Copernican astronomers, some Jesuit priests, went to China and tried to teach the Chinese Copernican astronomy. And so he's showing that there were very good chances that Western science could have arisen in other places in the world rather than Christian Europe, and didn't.
Yeah, I have read about 20% of that, and it is a very good book. I should actually finish it since you're bringing it up, Macrophage. Definitely recommend. It's a very interesting book because Tom Holland, like you said, Macrophage, is an atheist and he's a historian, and he basically looked into history and was like, oh, the entire way we think in the West is basically from Christian philosophy, you know, and we're like swimming in Christian philosophy even when we think that we're not, and all the stuff that we have, you know, or at least a great degree of it, comes from the Christian tradition. So it's a really fascinating book. But anyway, Macrophage, we better get to at least one more hand because I only have 12 minutes left. Thanks a lot for being here, though. I really appreciate it. Nathan, what's going on, man?
How's it going, Daniel? You having a good night?
Yeah, I'm having a pretty good night. We've just been doing a space with Lad here. It's been going pretty well.
I'm on my way to work, so if I sound like I'm in my car, it's because I am. I had one question for Macrophage really quick, and then I wanted to ask to talk about science being presupposed, I guess, by theism, or the other way around. Science presupposes theism. My question for Macrophage was, could you DM me the book that you mentioned, the first one? I know about Dominion, but the one I think it was called like Thinking God's Thoughts or something. Like, it sounded like a really interesting book. So if you could DM that to me, I'd appreciate it so I could get it and read it. And then as far as the discussion, there were a few points that I kind of like to bring up as far as talking about why I think that, um, you know, science presupposes that God exists. And to say them in order, it would be number one, what is called nomological consistency, which nomological just refers to laws. So basically, the fact that the laws themselves are so consistent is really surprising given atheism. And science has to presuppose this fact that the laws they are law-like and they will continue to be so. And, if an atheist wants to say, well, we observe that the laws are consistent, the response to that is just the problem of induction, because uh, just because we've observed something as it is in the past, it doesn't give us justification for saying it will be that way. We can think probabilistically, but we can't know for certain that the law of gravity won't change tomorrow. And so I think the nomological consistency of the universe, where all the laws work in such a way so consistently, kind of presupposes the idea that there is some mind behind them that sustains them and makes sure that they don't change. And I think that science presupposes that fact because, again, if we're just going off of empirical observations, the problem of induction comes in, and you cannot actually be justified in saying that they will continue on without presupposing that there's some sort of mind sustaining them. So that's probably the most interesting part for me when it comes to science presupposing God. So I wonder what you guys think of that.
I guess I'll go first. The short answer is you're right. When I brought the three basic assumptions very early on in the argument. There are three things we have to assume in order to even attempt science, which is that we exist, the universe exists, and we can learn something about the universe. Now, I'm not sure what the philosophical atheist answer for that one is, but from what I know, the answer is we don't have a good reason. We don't have a good reason to back that up. Besides, we have to. So it's very circular, and I will gladly admit that.
I can tell you the main response I hear from more philosophical atheists, just to give you some ammo. But basically what they say is that uniformity is intrinsically more probable than chaos, and so they want to say that law-like uniformity is actually going to be intrinsically more probable. So atheists can't explain it, but again, I don't think this avoids the problem of induction, and I also would reject that uniformity is more intrinsically probable. So I think that would be a difference in intuition, but either way, I don't think they get around the problem of induction. But the second thing, and I'll just stick with two. So that's the first one for me, why I think science presupposes God. But the second one is the fact that the universe is considered intelligible at all, because if we kind of take the atheist presuppositions, for an atheist to kind of say that science doesn't need a mind or doesn't need God or doesn't need these things, they kind of have to take for granted that the world exists and it's intelligible and there are conscious agents that exist and can understand things and have rationality. And so there's all these things that have to be in place prior to actually doing science that I think is really unlikely on atheism. And so it seems to me the only way an atheist can argue that there's not some sort of like mind like substance prior to doing science, they kind of have to say that they kind of have to take for granted that all those things exist. Like, we're rational beings that can know things and the universe is intelligible. And so for me, I would want to ask the atheist, like, how do you justify those assumptions without presupposing God or without God? And I've never been able to hear good answers for those things. And so, yeah, that'd be my second one, and I'll leave it there.
I may have misinterpreted this, but it sounds to me like you're saying that you're implying we need to know how the universe works before we can study it, which is kind of the opposite of how science works. Science is merely just a simple chain of logic that we use to discover how the universe works. It sounds to me like you were saying, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but it does sound like you're saying that we have to know how the universe was created and how things work in the universe to begin to understand how the universe works via science.
Nathan, you can correct him because he's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So So you're misunderstanding my point for sure. So essentially, what I'm saying is you have to, before you can even do science, you have to assume a lot of things that on the atheist paradigm don't make sense. Like, for example, we have reasoning and rationality, because on the naturalist paradigm, our reasoning and our reasoning capacities are done based on cause and effect basis, like one state of affairs in your brain, like the cells and the different neurons and all these things are going from one state of affairs to another, and one state of affairs causes the next one. And so but we wouldn't call that rationality, but that is what our brains are doing on the naturalist framework, and that's all they're doing. And so you kind of have to presuppose first that you have reasoning capacities, which is really difficult to ground, and I would argue impossible to ground on the naturalist framework. And then you have to assume that the universe is intelligible, which again on atheism that would be difficult to ground as well. So there's all these things that there's all these like prior hurdles that you have to get over before you even start doing science. And so
you might want to
me,
explain
that's kind of
intelligibility, Nathan, because
okay, gotcha. So like it's assuming that if we were to study the universe around us, that we could learn things about it and understand it. And so on these kinds of frameworks, like in order for an atheist to say, well, we don't need God to do science, I would agree with that, but that's a different claim, right? The difference is, do we need God to do science? No, we can use our brains. However, before you can do science, prior to that, you need a intelligible universe, you need rational thinking, you need all these things that are, I would argue, impossible to ground on the naturalist worldview. So I think for me, the questions that come prior to doing science are where that's where the rubber really meets the road when it comes to like atheism and science and all these things and how they seem kind of mutually incompatible.
Yeah, I just want to say, Nathan, real quick, that this is a really good argument. I should have been making this argument the entire time. I really like what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm
Do you
kidding, by
need
the way, Nathan, because I have been making this argument.
that was his argument. That was literally his argument.
Anyway, go ahead.
Do you need to so is it possible for us to do science? So you said it was possible. So just 2 seconds. Just to clarify, it is possible to do science without while making the assumption that we exist, that the universe exists, and we can learn something about the universe without having full justification, right? Like we don't have to have full confirmation of those things to do science in the first place, right?
So yeah, so of course you can do that, but the question is, are you rationally justified in doing that? And if you don't have rational justification, then I would say you're doing it at the very least, in uninformed way, and some might even argue in an irrational way if you're not justified, because you want to be rationally justified in what you're doing, right? And I think that if your worldview cannot coherently ground um, the things that you do in a rational way, then you at the very least should see that as a problem. If that makes sense. And by the way, Daniel, I didn't get to listen to the whole conversation, so if that was your argument the whole time, sorry for stealing your thunder. But yeah,
No, that's all right. You can have some of my thunder. I'm like Zeus. I've got plenty of thunder to go around. So
Lightning bolts for days.
yeah.
yeah. So
I'm gonna give
what'd you think
two
of
quick
the other
counter
one?
arguments. I'm gonna give two quick counter arguments. One I already gave to Darwin, and the second I think is just honestly just for you. The first is I think that not having a choice is a very good rational reason to do something. If you have a gun to your head and someone tells you to, I guess, give $100, and you give $100 because you have no other choice in the matter, that would, hypothetically have no other choice. That would be a very rational way of doing, a rational reason to do things. So I think it is completely rational for people who don't have an answer for why they exist, or why the universe exists, or heck, even if the universe exists, or if we can learn anything about it. I think making those assumptions because you have another choice is still a very rational thing to do. I also say that just because you have an answer doesn't mean it's a good answer or the right answer. So thinking that you need an answer in order to justify science in the first place is kind of putting the cart before the horse there.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that we should try to find an answer? And do you think that we should try to find one that's rational? Okay, so
of course, 100%.
Okay, so if your worldview seems like a bad candidate, do you think that would give reasons for rejecting your worldview?
Of course, 100%.
Okay, and so how do you feel like atheism does grounding these kinds of presuppositions?
I am not a philosophical atheist, so I can't give you the best answer on it. But the answer, we don't know, so we have to assume, I think is still a very good still a rational assumption that we just simply have to make because we don't have the answers. We weren't there. We weren't there when the universe was created. We don't even know if we're there to even exist. We could all be part of someone's dream right now. We could be part of Macrophage's big brain giant dream. We don't know. There's a lot of assumptions we have to make. Yeah. And also, while I have the mic, shout to Fallen Atheist. I watched you and Darwin's interaction was like the first podcast I watched from you guys at First Space, and that was a really cool discussion, by the way. Just throwing out there. Shout out.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I want to have Fallen Atheist on again. He's a good friend of mine. Awesome dude.
Yeah, he is really cool. I agree with that. So that's interesting. You're saying you kind of just have to assume these things and then go from there. Would you at least admit that that's circular?
Oh, 100% circular. 1000% circular.
Okay,
without a shadow of doubt.
So do you think that you should accept circular reasoning, or do you think you should try to make sure all your reasoning is valid?
Obviously, you should try to make sure all your reasoning is valid if you have a choice in the matter. But if you have no other choice, you kind of have to accept some circular reasoning. Well, until you have an actual explanation, until you have an actual answer, You kind of have to assume it. You have no other choice.
Well, I know Daniel's going to disagree with me here, but I'm a foundationalist in my epistemology, and so I do reject that all reasoning is circular. And so I actually don't think we have to assume things and then go from there. I think we can actually ground our reasoning in non-circular fashion, but it seems to me like you're just saying that you ground it circularly, which then my question would be if you're
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the only reason we're grounding it circularly is because we don't have an answer, right? Just jumping to
well, I think
is that
foundationalism is an answer. I think foundationalism gets you out of circularity, but the point I'm trying to make is because this is the question I have for people that think that their reasoning bottoms out in circularity. Where does circular reasoning stop? Like, if your reasoning at bottom is circular, where does the circularity stop? Where does sound reasoning begin? Because I think this is a really, yeah.
I don't think circular reasoning it stops circular reasoning. I think everything does have like at least some sort of answer that's non-circular. The problem is we just don't know what the actual answer is. We don't have the actual justification for the belief yet. So we are forced to engage in circular logic simply because we were ignorant. Because we're ignorant, we are forced to engage in circular argument. It's not ideal. Circular reasoning isn't ideal at all. We want to get rid of circular reasoning as much as possible, but because we are living in ignorance, we have no choice but to accept it. That is my point.
Well, do you think that?
Hey, without logic though, can you really not set anything in stone as a valid answer then? Because if it's subjective, then if the scientist says it's this way, why should you ever trust it from then on, even though the scientist says it's true?
Hey, Stanley, I was gonna call on you next. Would you mind putting your hand back up and letting Nathan finish? Nathan, I do need to get to bed really soon, so can you try to?
Sorry, I was just going to ask him one more question, and I'll leave it here.
Yeah.
So, do you think that the theistic response is a non-circular alternative?
Yes.
Okay, so then I would argue that you should adopt theism instead of bottoming out in circularity. I'll leave it there. Have a good night, guys.
Take it easy.
All right, thanks a lot, Nathan. Okay, sorry, Stanley. I know you've been waiting a while. So Stanley is going to be our last hand. Bruce, I do know that you had your hand up, but you did get to go before, and I am going a little bit over time. So, Bruce, if you want to continue in DMs, go ahead. Anyway, Stanley, go ahead. What's going on, man?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. Now I've only been listening for like the last 30 minutes, but where does only a lab? Where does he believe everything's from exactly?
I have no idea.
So you have no idea. So just kind of nothing. Is that fair to say, or Big Bang or whatever?
Okay, so if I had to give you an answer on the spot, I would say the universe itself is infinite, mainly because we don't observe matter actually getting created or destroyed. We see it getting assembled and disassembled. We see it getting designed and undesigned, but we don't ever see on a quantum level that anything is really created or destroyed. So because we don't see it, it is reasonable, therefore, to assume that the universe is infinite. The universe was not created or destroyed and will never be created or destroyed. Therefore, I can easily get out of the so the idea that the universe created or destroyed in the first place doesn't line up with what we see on a quantum level. I said that argument twice over. I apologize for that.
Okay, so if it's infinite, why is in this earthly realm? Why do we have like a finite life?
Because we are carbon-based life forms. We're biological creatures. We aren't the universe itself. We are simply specks of the universe, simply parts of it.
Okay, so if we make something, let's say there's an engineer or designer. If I make a machine, why isn't the machine able to go back to its elemental state? Why does someone have to create it in general? Why can't it do it itself?
Because the machine you made isn't sentient, or yeah, I guess because the machine you made isn't sentient.
Is the universe sentient?
It doesn't have to be sentient if it always existed.
But that contradicts, because how would it assemble and disassemble regardless?
Well, it was never assembled.
If there was an assembly point, that would be a start. That would be a start date for something. If something was assembled, if it's infinite, everything would have been assembled already, or it would always be disassembled.
Hey, Stanley, real quick. I I want to be clear because you said you have only been here the last 30 minutes. This space, the point of it is to have a good, productive conversation. So this isn't meant to be an antagonistic sort of thing where we grill only lad or anything like that. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's what you're doing, but I just want to be clear that this is my co-host and he's a guest and he came in here in good faith, and I made that clear to everyone in the beginning, but you weren't here for that. So I just want to be clear. He's been very polite this entire time. He's not here to get grilled by us, okay?
No, no. If I sound like that, I'm kind of being myself. I'm not.
Okay.
Forgive me if I sound arrogant, but
Um,
I gave him a follow because I acknowledge his
100%.
honesty.
All right,
Hey,
cool. I just want to
you're good, man. You're completely within line. I will tell you if I'm uncomfortable, and I'm not uncomfortable. The thing I think you missed was me saying that there's a difference between assembly and creation, right? When I talk about creation, I talk about like actually making matter out of nothing. That's something coming from nothing is creation, and something becoming nothing is destruction. Um, Assembly and disassembly is like putting a car together with the machine parts and taking the car apart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how would it assemble itself if there's no like uh mind behind to design it? I mean, everything, at least in the finite world, even though we deteriorate, this is kind of what Mormons believe, low key. There's like infinite matter. Um, Everything was assembled though. Did I mean the eternal universe somehow assembled everything intricately? Like there wasn't any mind behind it?
I would never say the universe itself was assembled or the universe itself assembled anything. I don't know where you're
So
getting
who
that
did it
from.
then? Who made like the earths and the structured things that take a form?
Nobody made the Earth.
So then that'd be
If
nothing then.
Well, okay, are you asking who created the Earth, who made the Earth's matter out of nothing, or who assembled the pieces that became the Earth? I'm confused.
Well, Stanley, he's an atheist. He doesn't believe that the universe was made by anyone. He believes that whatever the reason is, it's not because of a mind, remember? So obviously the who question would totally not be answered by him because he doesn't believe that a who is behind anything at the bottom of all of reality.
Yeah. If like the eternal universe seems to be unfathomable, right? Is that fair to say? If something's infinite, humans aren't able to find infinity, right? Or like understand it, right?
Yes, that would be a good assumption to make.
Okay, so if there's an unfathomable mind, um, who's who's to say that doesn't denounce God's omniscience, let's say, or his omni nature, if he's truly unfathomable?
Uh, I believe what you're asking is if God is an unfathomable mind, could he create an unfathomable universe? And yes, if God did exist and was an unfathomable mind, he could create an unfathomable universe. Is that what you were asking?
Uh, no, because God's the only one who's like truly unfathomable. Therefore, he makes things that aren't his nature. So God would be the only infinite one in that matter. So maybe I missaid that. Forgive me. But I don't know. I don't know how to look at that as how everything is designed or formed because science says things in the universe have a start date. So why is the universe eternal, but some things in the universe have a start date at the same time? I don't understand that.
All right, that's a slight either misunderstanding or miscommunication. Science itself doesn't say anything about the universe. Science is just a tool we use to learn more about the universe. The Big Bang theory was created by Christians, by the way, is a theory for how the universe is created. Do not quote me on this. I could be completely wrong, but from my understanding, the Big Bang came from the idea that because not magic, because matter moves outwards in the universe, it expands. Therefore, it must have expanded from a certain one single focal point, right? Now, the theory is that all the matter of the universe was compressed, super compressed to like I don't know the size of a pinhead or something, and then for some reason, all the matter exploded out, and it's still expanding, it's still going. Matter collided together and started forming different particles and stuff. That is a theory, one of many. However, the Big Bang Theory could be wrong, and science itself does not say the universe was created by the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory is just one of many theories that was created. I guess you could say using science, yeah. But again, it's just a theory. It's not a fact or anything, or an official stance of science, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. I don't really believe in the Big Bang Theory, but I do believe that everything has a start date. Let's say. Um, but so is it safe to say that all of your knowledge and understanding of the universe has been uh, obviously there's no divine inspiration, so you merely have to trust just humans. That's it, right? Because
Unfortunately, yes.
scientists, yeah.
Well, not just scientists, also philosophers, historians. But yes, definitely humans, and unfortunately, only humans. I wish there was like an alien species that would give us information, or heck, even a god to give us divine inspiration, divine teachings. I just do not believe that God exists. I have not seen good evidence for that God's existence, and I haven't really heard many good arguments for that God's existence either. So I simply have just no reason to believe it exists. I mean, I could definitely believe it if I wanted to. It wouldn't make sense for me to believe it, and I'm not sure I could get myself to believe it without like some sort of a diving board to take my leap of faith off. If that makes sense.
Hey Stanley,
Yeah.
and if I get to bed, I know that you have a lot to say here, but I'm already over time, man.
No, you're good. Nah, bro. No, do what you gotta do. Someone else open up. Only lad, if you want to open up get one going if you're down to talk.
I don't really know how to do that, but I'm down to come back for another Twitter space if Darren will have me. It can be a special everyone roast only a lad space. I'm cool with that 100%.
There will be
I'm used to more
there'll be no roasting of the only lad.
Dang it. Okay. Oh, thank you.
No, that's
all right.
how I run my spaces, man. But
Yeah, last thing I would say, only lad, is just look into early church, ancient Christianity, like how they viewed individuals who didn't believe in God. Or, I mean, that's why Socrates was killed as well. I mean, but yeah,
Stanley, are you Eastern Orthodox?
I'm in the realm of catechism, Serbian Orthodox. Yeah, learning the faith. I can't answer all your questions. I would read the saints, read the church fathers. They've covered this topic in depth, in the first century. So yeah, I acknowledge you being honest though, only lad. That's I strive to be like that, man. It's good talk.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Hey, I appreciate. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. God damn it.
You're fine, man. So, like I said, I gotta get going. But only lad, would you like to say anything, any parting thoughts, or anything like that before I wrap up the space?
Sure. I had a wonderful time here tonight. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I had a blast. All of y'all are really cool. I have a lot more respect for everyone here, especially Darwin, than I had before the panel. You guys are great. Everyone had great questions and stuff like that. It felt like a good discussion. Yeah. I look forward to coming back here sometime if you guys will have me. Aside from that, take it easy, everyone, and have a nice night. Y'all were a treat.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, I had a really good time as well. I really appreciated this discussion. I really appreciated how civil you were. This went very, very well in my estimation because it was productive and it was the opposite of a dumpster fire, and I cannot stand those. So, anyway, I hope that everybody here got something to think about. I hope that I communicated clearly. I think Only Lad did a fantastic job. I think everybody should go and definitely give him a follow. He did a really, really good job. A very good spokesman and representative for atheism, I think. And we need more atheists like Only Lad who can just come and chill out and have a good conversation, and I really appreciate him doing that. So, yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for coming here and listening. Even if you joined late, I appreciate you hopping into the space. And Only Lad, huge thank you to you, man. Kudos. Great job. Fantastic. Everybody go give him a follow. And hopefully we can do this again. I'd love to do this again. I love doing spaces with atheists that can just chill out and have a good conversation. And this is what I want to be doing. I want to be having good conversations with atheists. We need to be discussing these things. These things are important, like why are we here? That's the most important question that we can ask. And we need to be asking it sincerely and productively in my view. And I think everybody should feel that way. I really do. Anyway, with that out of the way, I am going to go and sleep with my beautiful, lovely wife. And I'm going to say, you all have a wonderful night and God bless.